America's two great pastimes collide on this podcast. It is baseball and making money from the dog days of summer through the October Classic. Greg Bases Peterson's going to be free swinging at the betting board as he tries to hit a grand slam for your bankroll. Now here is GP.
Hello, welcome to MLB Overtime Betting with myself, Greg Peterson. We've got a tremendous podcast for you. We're going to have a two-part conversation with Jason Collette. This is someone that graduated from Central Florida, so he knows a lot about Florida. He's based out there in North Carolina, so he's a little bit closer to where everything is opening up. I think it's going to be a great two-part conversation with him. We're going to talk a little bit about the logistics because, as we know, we have a couple states that are opening back up. There are a couple states with baseball like Washington, California, what have you, that they're still under lockdown. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that dynamic and how we might see like backloaded home schedules if that winds up being the case. But Jason actually thinks that we're going to get one of the original plans that we've been hearing about with like everything being placed in Arizona, everything being placed in Arizona/Florida, the Texas plan, everything like that. So we're going to be talking about that for a few minutes, but we're really going to be diving into a lot of these teams a little bit more. What teams are going to be able to benefit a little bit more from this layoff? Because as we know, there were a couple of teams that were banged up coming into the season, and some of the attributes that you want to look for with some of these teams as well. Because if you are under the assumption that we're going to have a baseball season, and I certainly am, you have to narrow down, okay, what does this layoff really do with regards to pitching, hitting, what have you? What kind of teams are going to be able to benefit? What kind of teams might be behind the eight ball a little bit? I think that that's a very big determination of this, and if you're able to nail it, I think that it's going to be very profitable for you. It's very obvious that we're not going to be getting a 162-game season, but I think that it's worth watching the newswire as to what is all being thrown out there, because we had been hearing a little bit from Rob Manfred about double headers when he wound up going on Scott Van Pelt the day before the MLB season was supposed to start on like March 25th, March 26th. We haven't really heard anything about those 7-inning doubleheaders ever since then, but we have been hearing a lot about the universal designated hitter because, as we know, there's a lot of moving and shaking when it comes to possible realignment. We have seen the Grapefruit League and Cactus League plan. We've also seen the three regions in which you've got like the East, Central, and the West. So it's just really good to be able to keep up with those sort of things. And we did see a little bit of news from baseball a few days ago in that umpires are going to be taking a reduction of pay. It looks like they're going to be losing about, like, when it's all said and done, between 30 and 35% of their pay, because they're going to be losing 25% off the top, but then they're going to be getting a little bit less when it comes to travel. And what I think it's going to lead to as well is we're probably going to wind up getting an electronic strike zone. So I do think that it's worth brushing up a little bit as to how the electronic strike zone works, because we've talked to a couple people that have a little bit of experience on this podcast. I know that the best one, in my opinion, was William Bohr, because this is someone that he does a lot of studying of the minor league systems. He, around the clock, is really working with MLB Pipeline, which looks at a little bit more of the minor league side of things. And as we know, the minor leagues, a couple of them wound up experimenting with the electronic strike zone last year and years prior, and from what he was telling me, it's not quite as good as the human eye, but at the same time, it is one of these things where baseball is likely going to be promoting social distancing, and for those that don't like the term social distancing, physical distancing in order to try to get baseball back. So those are sort of the things that you want to be taking a look at right now. So it is a little bit of a balancing act right now. You do want to be taking a look at some of these teams, but I encourage you guys, much like I was talking about when Tim Murray joined the podcast a couple days ago, don't go knee deep into trying to look at futures for the division or anything like that, just because there are so many realignment plans that are being thrown out there. The odds are more likely than not that if you wind up firing in a futures bet, you're probably just going to wind up with a refund. It's not worth your money at this point, in my opinion. What you want to be doing is looking at these teams on their own island, just looking at, okay, this is how the Chicago White Sox, a team that you're going to find out we talk a lot about, this is how they benefit from this layoff. This is some of the detriments to them, strengths, weaknesses. Here are some of the acquisitions that the Milwaukee Brewers made. List goes on and on. That's what I encourage you guys to do right now. Just take a look at these teams as their own I guess you could call it living, breathing entity, and where they wind up with regards to a division, you then go from there. It's just sort of like putting the pieces together with a puzzle, and there are a lot of pieces because we don't know what's going to be happening with regards to that universal designated hitter, but it sounds like we might be getting that. We don't know what the divisions are going to be looking like, so just all about rolling with the punches, keeping up with the news. And I keep saying it on this podcast, I am confident that we will be getting a baseball season. From everything I have been hearing, it's most likely going to be in like very, very late June, 4th of July. Scott Seidenberg was championing that, and there's no reason to disagree with that. Now, do I know when baseball is going to be starting? Heck no. I am not paid enough to know these sorts of things. That is not something that is in my control whatsoever. But what I can do is roll with the punches, keep up with the newswire, and just be prepared for when baseball comes back into our lives. And I encourage you guys to do the same thing. And if there's ever a way that I can help you guys do that, always feel free to fire in a question to my Twitter timeline at @GUnit_81. If you send it to the timeline, more than happy to give you an answer on this podcast. If you send it via DM, well, the letters DM to me does not matter. So I encourage you guys to send those questions via my timeline. Did not get in any today, or else I would have addressed them up front. But if there's something that you'd like answered on a future podcast, please let me know. And coming up next, we are going to be talking to Jason Collette. He does great work with both Rotowire and also Fangraphs. Going to be having a two-part conversation. The first part of it is going to be a little bit of the logistics, but we're really going to be doing a deep dive on some of these teams that we think will have a lot of value given a condensed 2020 season and everything that has been laid out from all these proposals that we have, and also just the logistics side in general with having this long layoff. And that's going to be coming up on the other side for two parts right here on MLB Overtime Betting with myself, Greg Peterson.
Greg is phoning a friend and going out to the Azunia hotline.
And we're back here on MLB Overtime Betting with myself, Greg Peterson. Great to have on our next guest. This is a man that does absolutely terrific work doing a variety of different things for many different baseball publications. Right now, he is mainly doing stuff for Rotowire as a columnist, and he also does some podcasting for Fangraphs as well. You can follow him on Twitter at his name, Jason Collette, and that is all together as it is Jason Collette. And Jason, great to have you on the podcast today. How are you?
Thanks for having me. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. And what else is great is the fact that it seems like some of these states are starting to open up a little bit more now. How long they're going to be staying open, how it goes, that's still anyone's guess, as a lot of these states just wound up opening up on May 1st. But I know that you're a Central Florida graduate, and I know that Florida's been thrown around in a lot of these realignment plans. It's mostly been Florida, Arizona, and then Texas has been thrown in the mix as well. But it sounds like there might be a little bit of a push to try to get these games back in the team's home ballparks as well. What do you think will ultimately be the case with this? Because I still think that it's anyone's guess, but the fact that some of these states are still opening up is good. And even if we don't have all these states open up, because I know that California has been much slower than, say, like a Georgia or a Florida, I know that in the minor leagues, being a fan of the Milwaukee Brewers, a lot of the minor league affiliates, they wound up playing on the road for like 50 straight games while the stadium was under construction. And that, as weird as it sounds, might be an option.
We'll see what happens with things. I mean, honestly, I think this Florida, Texas, Arizona plan makes the most logical sense. When you look at a condensed version of the season, maybe 80 to 100 games, minimizing travel would be ideal for this because they're also going to try to maximize the amount of games. So they're not talking, some weeks you have 5 games during the season. I think they're talking about 6-game weeks, sometimes 7 games a week. So they're going to really try to maximize the schedule, and reducing travel for that would make that easier to do. Between reducing travel and expanding the rosters, this was supposed to be the first year of the 26-man roster. We think they may go 28 to allow some a little more rest and rotation for some things. So it looks like they're trying to push. If you maybe bet on when the season's going to open, I said for about a month now, I think July 4th is going to be the day they try to launch the baseball season.
I'm right there with you. I've been looking at early July all along as well, and I do think it's going to be so fascinating. And one of the big questions that I've been asking myself is something that you just touched on, roster expansion, because typically it used to be 25-man roster until you wound up getting to the month of September, and then all what would break loose as you would get like 100 million billion guys up there at the major leagues. And I think it is going to be interesting because I know that it hasn't officially been canceled, but you got to think that there's going to be no minor league baseball this year. And with a condensed season, what I think is going to be the biggest challenge as well is you're going to have that second spring training And I could definitely see a scenario in which you see quite a few of these pitchers get hurt because they're trying to re-ramp themselves up. There's no real way of being able to train for a lot of these guys right now. So I do think that roster expansion is going to have to be a part of the fold. And I could even see them going beyond the 28 that you just threw out there as well. I'm not sure what you think about it, but I certainly do think that we are going to see some roster expansion. The question is just how far do they go?
I agree. I think we could have like maybe a 28-man active roster and a taxi squad to keep somebody that you can flip some guys in and out, because this is an atypical season. We've never had in the modern era the season start, stop, and restart. The last time we had that was 1981 when we had the 50-day strike in the middle of the season. That's it. Or even, 1995 when they had the little tiny strike. And that was maybe, a week and a half, 2 weeks. Everybody was ramped up, was just about ready to go, and now completely shut down and having to start over from scratch. So it's going to be unusual. And I think you'll see some teams maximize, if they're only allowed to carry so many pitchers, not try to get these guys that are going to run a ton of things like, hey, I'm going to go 7 innings every time I pitch. No, I could see them trying to rotate some pitchers and build up arm strength. And even then with some of the prospects, normally we're pretty excited about some prospects like Nate Pearson from Toronto. Good chance that they may just leave him down and let him work through a simulated season for a lot of time because they want him to get his innings. Well, if you're going to be in a condensed season, maybe that's not the best place to jump right into things. So it's going to be very interesting to see how these teams handle this completely unique situation.
Totally agree with you, as we do have Jason Collette of Rotowire and also Fangraphs joining me right here on the podcast. And some of the teams that I'm taking a look at that I feel like might have a little bit of an advantage with this 2020 season, it's obviously some of the teams that wound up having some injury concerns coming into the year. We know that Justin Verlander was going to need a miracle for him to be ready opening day for the Houston Astros. Well, good news is for him, he's probably going to be ready opening day. Bad news is probably not the miracle that he was hoping for. But with that said, he is probably going to be good to go. The New York Yankees, they were all sorts of banged up. You didn't know when you were going to get back Aaron Hicks. Giancarlo Stanton was dealing with injuries. Aaron Judge was dealing with injuries. Heck, I think that Brian Cashman was stubbing his toe, and I think that he might have been out for opening day as well. So, I mean, that's just the way that things have been going for the New York Yankees. But I think that they really benefit. But who else really benefits, in my opinion? These teams that don't necessarily rely on a ton of starting pitching. Because if there's one position that I think is going to really suffer from this layoff, it's these starting pitchers. Because how do you simulate throwing like 85 plus pitches in your backyard when you have nothing to use other than maybe throwing to a tarp or something like that? Because I know that a lot of these guys, they're trying to play catch with family members, but are you really going to try to put like a 90 plus mile per hour fastball on like a 10-year-old son?
Right. That's a good point. I mean, when you look at spring training, pitchers and catchers always start early. They're usually about 5 to 7 days before everybody else. And you've talked to them, they say they need 3 to 4 weeks to get ready. That's what they'll try to say, like, okay, I'm ready to go. And even in this early part of the season, it's rare that we see somebody go 7 innings. Most of the time it's 5, 6, and you're out. But on paper, if we go back to January, the teams that we all liked in January are still the favorites in this new scenario. Let's say the season does start in July, because like you said, Yankees got dinged up like crazy in February and March. This has given them time to heal, so they're back up there. But I think some of these other teams that we looked at as middle rank in an 80-game season, anything's possible. So you look at somebody like Chicago White Sox, who have a great blend of youth and veteran experience. Questionable starting pitching. I mean, decent enough, but there's some questions on the pitching staff, but you really like the offense. In a shorter season, they have a chance to do something. So maybe they do something, and they're aggressive with bringing back Michael Kopech. They've got Dylan Cease, and they can elevate some things and try it and see what can happen. Because you look at these proposed divisions and you look at that Central, you're like, you know what? They could be one of the top 2 teams in that. That's not inconceivable for them to try that. So I'm interested to see how some of those teams that we didn't think had a chance in 2020 now have a chance in a shorter season where anybody can get on a heater and go running. I always point back to 2005 Tampa Bay Devil Rays. Terrible team, but they won something like 16 straight games at one point. They only won 68 on the season, but for a while they had a great winning streak. And so anything's possible for any team, but the White Sox in particular intrigue me just because of how explosive that offense can be. If the youth, if Luis Robert and Eloy Jimenez and Nick Madrigal, if they all do what they're capable of doing, it could be a really exciting offense.
And speaking of inconceivable runs, how can we forget in 2019, the Seattle Mariners started something like 13-2, and then they were just absolutely awful the rest of the season. So
that too.
We certainly could see something like that, and I'm very glad you brought up the Chicago White Sox. What I've been saying on this podcast for a few weeks is that I think the White Sox have a chance to do some real damage. Now, I'm not taking a look at odds to win the American League Central, odds to win divisions or anything like that, just because, well, we don't know what the realignment is going to be. Are we going to get the 3 regions? Are we going to get the Grapefruit League and the Cactus League? Are we going to get, like, the leaders and legends back from the Big Ten several years ago? We just don't know at this point. But with the Chicago White Sox, what I really like about this team is that they have someone that has experience with sort of a stop-and-go sort of scenario in Dallas Keuchel. We remember last year, he didn't start pitching for the Atlanta Braves until right towards the All-Star break. He wound up getting a couple starts before the All-Star break, and then he was in the middle of a pennant chase for the second half of the year. I think that his experience could help out a team that you just mentioned. They've got some older guys, they've got some younger guys, and a big question with the White Sox as well was that starting pitching. Michael Kopech, Carlos Rodon, they now have more time to be able to heal up, and that helps out the pitching staff as well.
Yeah, it's really an interesting team. Like I said, I love how they brought in the veterans. I mean, they made 3 acquisitions this winter: Steve Cishek, Dallas Keuchel, and Edwin Encarnacion. And they brought back Jose Abreu. But I think the best thing they did overall was going to get Yasmani Grandal. He is fantastic behind the plate. He can make a mediocre pitching staff better with his defensive skills, where he can frame pitches. I think he's going to be a tremendous fit for this team, hitting in the middle of the lineup, playing some first base if Jose Abreu needs a day off or Encarnacion gets hurt, Abreu shifts to DH. They've got some flexibility, but the blending of the youth and the experience plus him behind the plate, again, it would not surprise me if they get into the postseason this year in this abbreviated season. It's the one team that I really want to keep an eye on outside of my personal favorite team.
Completely agree with you, as we do have Jason Collette joining me right here on the podcast. And Jason, I know that you just mentioned it, the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, now known as the Tampa Bay Rays. This is another team that I'm very bullish on and I think can do very well in a condensed 2020 season. We are mentioning the bullpen, so how about if we take a break right here, and on the other side, we talk a little bit about the Tampa Bay Rays and a couple other teams that we like for the 2020 season right here on MLB Overtime Betting with myself, Greg Peterson.
Welcome back to MLB Overtime. Greg is throwing a gem, so yeah, he better not blow it.
And we're back here in Mobile, Las Vegas for MLB Overtime Betting with myself, Greg Peterson. Great to be rejoined by Jason Collette. He does terrific work as a podcaster for Fangraphs, and he also is a columnist with Rotowire. We're going to be asking him at the end about what he's doing. This is a man that wears very many hats. He does a lot of different radio shows, columns, and does them all so well, and you can follow him on Twitter at his name, Jason Collette. And before we hit the break, we were talking a little bit about the Tampa Bay Rays. This is a team that I think has a chance to do wonders during the 2020 season. And it feels like this is a team that is more loaded than ever before. What I like about the Tampa Bay Rays is because I mentioned it a little bit earlier. You don't know how deep these starters are going to be able to go, certainly at the beginning of the season, even towards down the stretch, because I do think that starting pitchers are being hit harder than anyone else with this layoff. And what you like about the Tampa Bay Rays is that they really don't rely on their starters going like 7+ innings. Certainly you've got Blake Snell, Tyler Glasnow, Charlie Morton, but these aren't guys, other than maybe Morton, that are typically going to go past 6 innings. Ryan Yarbrough was a guy that was a little bit hit or miss last year, but he had some very good flashes as well. And we know that with the Tampa Bay Rays, they've got a system in which pretty much anyone is able to open, anyone in that bullpen is able to give you more than 1 inning. And I think that that's going to be a big leg up for them as well. And they've got, I guess you could call it functional hitting. They don't have that one guy other than maybe Austin Meadows, who I do think is going to be absolutely terrific this year. But they just got a bunch of guys that they hit right around 250, 260. They've all got a little bit of pop in the bat. And some of these guys, if they get hot, they're just able to carry a team for a couple games until someone else gets hot. And then they sort of take over that role themselves.
Right, and the bullpen story, I think that applies to 3 teams in particular before I get back to Tampa Bay. With the Yankees and the Padres and the Rays, I firmly believe those are the 3 best bullpens in baseball, and it's going to give those teams an extra advantage in this season because of how they've built those bullpens. But focusing on Tampa Bay, you're right, there's so much depth across that roster. It's like, yeah, Austin Meadows, all-star, Willie Adames just hitting the radar, but they have a lot of depth that you look at. They've got the righty and lefty situation. In previous years, they just threw together some names and hoped for the best. But you look at this roster right now, and it's the strongest roster that I've ever seen them have. You could go into 2008 was a surprise season. Even back then, everybody around the team said it was a year early. And then in 2011, they won 97 games. Last year, they surprised everybody, winning 97 or 96 again. But you look at this roster now, there's a lot of load. That's what could be really exciting about it, because righty-lefty platoon, if Jose Martinez can bounce back to where he was 2 years ago with St. Louis, that gives him a really strong presence from the right-hand side. At worst, he still just obliterates lefty pitching, and that's something that the team needed last year. And they've got the outfield depth. And one thing I really like what they did this offseason was go get Manny Margot from San Diego to give Kevin Kiermaier some rest. And Kiermaier's defense keeps him in the lineup every day, but his offense doesn't belong in the lineup every day. And if you can give Margot some of those at-bats against those tough lefties that Kiermaier struggles against, or when Kiermaier tends to get hurt every year, there's a big drop-off in defense. Not anymore. Margot is a fantastic defender in his own right. And so it gives him some more insurance policy where the team's not suffering from that critical center field defense if Kiermaier goes on a DL again.
Very good point that you bring up, as we do have Jason Collette joining me right here on the podcast. And I do think that this year is going to be so fascinating. And there are those teams with the bullpen that you and I have both mentioned that I really like. And one of the most curious cases, I think, is going to be the Chicago Cubs, because the Chicago Cubs actually did not have a terrible bullpen ERA, but with the Chicago Cubs, what happened was they could not close out a game in the ninth inning. We saw it in September. The 4 blown leads that they had against the St. Louis Cardinals, like Craig Kimbrell completely losing who he was, that certainly did not go well for them. Obviously, we have a new manager out there in the city of Chicago, David Ross, as Joe Madden is out headed to the West Coast. So you've got a lot of moving and shaking there. And this is still one of the top lineups out there in baseball. Chris Bryant, very good. Anthony Rendon. You could just run down the list of big boppers in that lineup, and you got a whole bunch of them. What do you see for the Chicago Cubs? Because I certainly do think that they're going to be in a bunch of slugfests, but another thing that really concerned me was that the Chicago Cubs last year, they were tremendous at home, and they were tremendously awful on the road. If we wind up getting something like the Florida plan, the Arizona plan, where we've got the 3 regions, the 3 bubbles, things like that, I think it really hurts them just because they weren't the same team away from Wrigley.
Right. With the bullpen, I agree with you. Craig Kimbrell did struggle to throw strikes, and that's what really came back to hurt him. But the one way to hide a bad bullpen is to have a good starting rotation. And with Hendricks and Darvish and Lester and Quintana, you've got some pieces that give you some depth so your bullpen doesn't have to be overworked. I mean, I like Rowan Wick there. Jeremy Jeffress, I like a bit on a rebound. Casey Sadler's even a nice piece. And even if Jarrell Cotton, I mean, that's a name we got to get to come back. But Jarrell Cotton was, before he got hurt in Oakland, really showed some upside. So they've got some pieces there that are intriguing, but they're going to have to get some distance from those starting pitchers. And they've got experience in that starting rotation. It's not like these kids where the kids aren't able to go deeper into a game. You would think of all the pitchers that won't have a tough time adjusting to this new season, it would be these types of veterans. And so I think that's how those guys perform. It's going to swing how this team goes. But overall, when you look at it, it's an interesting mix. And I think one overlooked piece of it, because we're likely going to have this universal DH, they can put Kyle Schwarber at DH and get him out of left field and then upgrade their overall defense by having Albert Almora play in the field and help that overall defense, which again makes your pitching look a little better too.
I do think that it's going to be a very interesting year for the Cubs, to say the least. And I do feel like there are a couple teams out there that are going a little under the radar. We were mentioning the Chicago White Sox. We both certainly like them. Another team that I might take a look at is the Toronto Blue Jays, because the big downfall of the Blue Jays last year was you had guys like Clayton Richard and Aaron Sanchez and guys like that were starting games. I think that Sanchez wound up losing like 11 or 12 straight starts. I mean, that was just absolutely terrible. But you bring in a guy like a Waguespack who was able to do a solid job towards the end of last year. You've got some guys that are coming up in the bullpen that I really like. They wind up trading for Anthony Kay from the Mets. I think that he has a little bit of upside. And then you've got the young boppers, Vlad Guerrero Jr., Bichette, the list goes on. And I do think that the Blue Jays, regardless of how realignment goes, they're going to be able to make some noise regardless of what division they're in, just because this is a little bit of a younger team and they're not used to that 162 game grind. So I do feel like just because they're not used to 162 games, they're not quite used to the regular rigors of the MLB, that it might actually be a little bit of an advantage for them.
Let's say you're a baseball fan and you're disenfranchised with your favorite team. This is one of those teams you should watch, because they should be fun to watch, at least at the plate. When you look through, their lineup is so young, and you can look at almost every position and say, wow, Danny Jansen, yes, he struggled last year as a rookie catcher, but it's such a tough position to try to excel in your rookie year. But Danny Jansen's a very talented backstop, and I think is going to be in for a good year. Rowdy Tellez, maybe not a household name, but there's a lot of pop in that bat, and it has the opportunity, he's going to be able to show it. We saw what Kevin Biggio can do over the course of the season. You don't even talk about Vladito, Bobichette, very exciting. And then the outfield of Gurriel, Hernandez, and Grichuk. A lot of pop in those bats. And then what's intriguing about this team is how they've assembled their pitching staff. Everybody else is going out there and getting all these fastballers. But yeah, Toronto's got Nate Pearson. He probably has the biggest fastball of any starting pitcher in baseball right now with miles per hour. But the rest of the staff is like the anti-fastball pitcher. Tanner Roark and Hyun-Jin Ryu, Trent Thornton, Chase Anderson, Matt Shoemaker. Those are all guys that get the job done with non-fastball pitches. And so it's going to be very intriguing in this day and age where everybody is trying to blow the ball by everybody to see how this team performs with a bunch of pitchers whose best pitch is not their fastball. I think it's a nice move because everybody is trying to go up there, chase high heat. And then if you're looking for high heat and get that junk low, they could have a lot of strikeouts there. And then at the back end of the bullpen, Ken Giles, fantastic at the end of the bullpen, but they've got enough pieces there in the middle to just keep cycling some arms through and see what sticks.
And under the radar, too, Wilmer Font towards the end of last year was actually one of the better openers that you could find in baseball as well. So that's another reason why I do like the Toronto Blue Jays. And Jason, is there anything else that you're really watching for the 2020 season? Because obviously we've got a whole bunch of logistical issues. Obviously umpires have taken a pay cut, but we're probably going to wind up getting a universal designated hitter. If we wind up getting realignment, there's a good chance that we're going to have an electronic strike zone to promote social distancing. What are you really looking for that might affect some of these games in 2020? Because I think that there's a whole laundry list of them, but there are some that are bigger than others, like the ones I was talking about earlier.
Right, and the universal DH to me is the key there because it changes the way the National League game is played. Because typically, if the 8th place hitter comes up and there's a base empty, let's say the 7th place guy gets a double, there's 1 out or 2 outs, and then you have a base open, you're going to walk the 8th place guy. You're going to pitch around him so you can get to the pitchers. Pitchers league-wide hit $128 last year. The National League hit $149, and then the AL hit $118. So it's like it's a non-thing. So now you're putting the DH in play, and it changes some things like that. You can't pitch around the 8th place guy to get to the 9th guy. And typically, because of the way the National League game is at the bottom of the lineup, there's not a lot of stolen bases. So let's say that 8th place guy is put on base. They're not going to even let that guy try to run and steal second because if he gets thrown out, the inning's over. Your pitcher's leading off the next inning. So it's like it's going to change the way the game is played in the National League. And so that's where I want to see how that adapts and how teams adapt to that because, you know, you look at just basic ERA, you're like, oh, yeah, NL pitchers are better. The ERAs are lower. Yeah, because they have the easier part of the bottom part of the lineup. But now it's a more well-rounded thing. So I'm very curious to see how that goes because there was talk about the next collective bargaining agreement having that and it being the new rule moving forward. Now we get a taste of it right now. And I don't see how we don't get a taste of it right now because there's no other way to make this whole thing work. We can't do unbalanced schedules and we can't have these guys traveling all over the country. That's why they want to regionalize this to Metro Phoenix, Metro Dallas, and Metro Tampa Bay so they can maximize these things. And we'll see how this new norm plays out. But I think Universal DH is going to be here to stay. As a fan of it, I'm happy, even though I grew up a National League fan in Houston, but I can't stand pitchers hitting. It just drives me insane. If you want to keep pitchers hitting, maybe DH for your catcher. Like if you're Houston and Martin Maldonado was in there catching, he's back there for his defense. And you have Zach Greinke pitching that day, let Zach Greinke hit, and you can DH for Martin Maldonado if you want to. If you want to see some pitchers hit, but even as much people talk about Madison Bumgarner, so much of his history on hitting is built from 5 years ago. He hasn't done much at the plate the last few years either. I'm actually excited about this.
Being a Milwaukee Brewers fan, the Brewers have some of the best hitting of any pitching staff in baseball, so I will say that for them. So it certainly is going to be very interesting, and I'm right there with you. I thought that this was going to be coming within the next few years. I think that these strange circumstances has accelerated this process a little bit. And Jason, I would like to close it up with this. Speaking of acceleration, you are putting out some fantastic baseball content at an accelerated speed. So tell the people at home where they can find a little bit more of your work and just what you're all doing, because I know that you do a fantastic job with both Rotowire and also Fangraphs.
Sure, thanks. So I have a Collette Calls column at Rotowire. You can go to rotowire.com/radio, free 10-day trial. Don't even need a credit card. So if you want to go there, check out my work and the work from my colleagues like Todd Zola and Clay Link, James Anderson about prospects. You can go check it out 10 days free. I also do a podcast at Fangraphs, Sleeper in the Bus, usually once a week on Sundays. And then I've been doing the Rotowire podcast every other Friday, and then the MLB fantasy show for Rotowire on the MLB network on Sirius XM. It usually runs Saturday at 4 o'clock Eastern.
Terrific. Jason doing a great job of keeping up with everything that's going on in baseball. So big thanks to him for joining me right here on MLB Overtime Betting. And if you like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you ever have a question for the podcast, fire it into my timeline at GUN_D1. Going to be coming at you guys 3 times a week until we get baseball back to our lives daily. And then once baseball's back daily, I'm back daily as well. Talk to you guys in a few. Thank you.